everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. Every Wednesday, photographers from all over the world meet here to connect, inspire, and create. Our guest speakers share their images, photography tips, and stories of inspiration to help you improve your own photography skills. The schedule for our upcoming presentations is on my website at lindanickell.com, as well as the links to previous sessions on YouTube. Tonight, my guests are Karen Cooper, a fine art, nature, and landscape photographer based in Vancouver. Karen's dramatic landscapes images showcase the rugged and untamed beauty of British Columbia. In 2010, Karen opened her gallery on Granville Island, where she is now a leader in producing luxury fine art photography. You can connect with Karen through her website at karencoopergallery.com. Brenda Petrella is a nature and landscape photographer based in Vermont. Brenda is the founder of the Outdoor Photography School and the host of the Outdoor Photography Podcast, a weekly interview with top nature and landscape photographers and leaders in the outdoor industry where they discuss their approach to connecting with nature. Last year, Brenda was here to present session number 52 for the Happiness Hour, called Nature Photography in Non-Iconic Locations, and you can find it on the YouTube channel. You can reach Brenda through her website at outdoorphotographyschool.com. In tonight's presentation, Ask Us Anything, Brenda and Karen will answer your questions related to nature and landscape photography, conservation, composition, creativity, and a little bit of everything in between. So welcome to the Happiness Hour, ladies.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Hey, all right. Before you get started, I'm going to start with Brenda.
Sure.
And it's one of those things where I feel like I might be too familiar with you because I listened to your podcast. I stalked you on YouTube. And so I kind of feel like I know a little bit more about you than I should. It's weird, but I also just kind of gave just a little, just kind of like a couple of things to tick off when I introduced you. Is there something that I missed that you want to share? Some deep, dark secrets that, you haven't told anybody yet?
Wow, we're just getting to the meat of it right away. Right. Tell us your secrets.
I know, right? Don't worry, Karen Cooper, you're next.
Oh boy.
Let's see. I guess. Go ahead. What's that, Karen?
I'm taking notes. I'm going to use this later.
Don't worry, we're recording, Karen. You don't have to take notes. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, Brenda. No, seriously, is there something that I kind of missed? Because I know a little bit about your background because I've heard you speak before. So if you want to share that, give us like how you got into photography, because not everybody knows your backstory.
Sure. Yeah. So photography is a passion that I've had for my whole life, but not one that I ever pursued until I sort of hung up my career as a scientist. So I'm a trained molecular biologist. I used to study cancer. I had a cancer research laboratory studying kidney cancer. And through funding shortages and a lot of other, personal decisions, I decided to close the doors on my scientific career. And a year prior to that decision, I was gifted my first camera. So I sort of like went around my whole life being like, oh, I wish I had a camera. I wish I had a camera. And I never really went past the, point and shoot or disposable camera because I just didn't feel like I had the time to pursue it because I was pretty monofocused on my scientific career. And so it wasn't until I was gifted a camera that I actually started to really dive into studying photography and doing it. And I never looked back. So that's my short story of how I got into it. And I'm so glad for that happening because otherwise I might still be a scientist.
Well, it just seems like, I've been watching you for a little while, and I mean, it's just a fast track, you started out with your YouTube channel and you did a series of and people have asked before is like, how do I learn photo pills? Brenda did a great series on photo pills. So that's on her YouTube channel. But now you're doing your podcast, and you really are kind of getting recognized as a leader yourself. And I'm like applauding you. I'm really excited for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So don't be shy. Don't be shy. Tell us, what made you what made you decide I'm going to just do a podcast? Because
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. I love podcasts. And so I have spent a good majority of my time listening to podcasts. Some people may or may not know, but we have 2 pet cows. That's a whole story in and of itself. But needless to say, I spend a lot of time scooping cow poop. And so I passed that time by listening to podcasts. And I found that early in my growth as a photographer, I really relied on podcasts as one of my educational sources. And so, I did the YouTube channel for a little bit. It's not over, but I haven't been active on it in a while. And mostly because of life, having knee surgery and a daughter that was born, she's 3 now, and all that kind of stuff, getting out and doing videos in the field became more challenging. And I still wanted to be contributing educational content in some way. And I thought, well, I really love listening to podcasts. I would love to connect with other people, because I don't want it to be just my voice in this, and I thought, well, with a podcast, so the podcast is a mixed style podcast for people who aren't familiar with it. So every other week I have an interview, and every other week from that, I give what's called a Tidbit Tuesday, which is where that's more like the how-to content, whereas the interviews is my attempt to showcase somebody else's work and talk about their creative process. And it's been just really rewarding. And so, it's an easier way for me to produce content and get it out there on a regular basis than the videos were at this point in my life. So yeah, and it's been a really great decision. So it started just over a year ago.
Yeah. And that segues me so smoothly into how Karen Cooper came into my life, is because she was a guest on your podcast. So Karen Cooper, you're up. I probably know a little bit more about Karen Cooper than she would like for me to know about her. I feel like as a stalker, but Karen, your journey into photography is an interesting story too. Are you willing to give us a little bit of background of how you turned it into a profession?
Sure. I was an ultrasound technician, first an X-ray technician, ultrasound technician. So I was in the medical field forever. And in 2000 or before, I was in a car accident, and I lost my career. I couldn't do it anymore after many, many years of rehab. So while I was doing rehab, I picked a camera up. And I thought, I need something technical. I need to do something more than, every week going to rehab and getting poked with needles and all that horrible stuff on the other end of the medical field, which is not fun. I don't recommend it. So I got hooked on it. And what I found was that there's very little information out about where people with disabilities can go to be in nature or to see nature. So I didn't know anything about blogs. So I thought, well, let me start a blog so that I can put areas where I could go. I could literally go within a block of where I lived. Let me start finding areas where people can go, and I'll just take a photo of them and put them up, and maybe that will help other people. Well, it grew. And then I had people asking me, can I, go to a different area, and what is in this area and that area. So as I recovered slowly from this accident, I was able to go further afield. And I covered what we call the Lower Mainland in British Columbia. And then it just grew from there, and I got hooked on British Columbia history and how that relates to photography. Can we show what's left of the 1850s? So it just grew from there. And that's kind of how I got into it. It was the technical aspect that I quite enjoyed.
See, that's the part I don't like. It's like, oh man, it's just my brain doesn't, well, Brenda has a science background, so I think she's geared to being more technical. I am not. I'm more like Lexi Daisy about, I like that. I'll hit a click and then I might get lucky. So I thank you for sharing that with us. And I have to admit, I knew that, but I really, now we have it recorded.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, ladies, when I asked a few people to submit some questions, I was tickled to see how many questions that came in. So I feel like we need to jump in so that we can get through as many as we can. And you guys in the audience, if there are some questions that you'd like to ask, that you put them in the chat, and I'll grab them as quickly and as efficiently as I can. The first group of questions kind of is about, I grouped them as composition and subject, but let's start off with Kathy had kind of a view of, she wanted to know, are there specific techniques, are there specific subjects, do you have to take landscape photos only? Can you only do wildlife? Can you only do portraits to be considered worthy to be labeled a professional photographer? So just kind of, can you define, because both of you make your living as professional photographers, how do you define it? And do you feel like people have to pigeonhole themselves into one subject to kind of get that reputation as a wildlife photographer, or can you do a little bit of everything and still call yourself professional? You want to take that, Brenda?
Sure. I would say, it is whatever it is that you want to be doing. So, there's, I think the definition of professional versus hobbyist versus amateur photographer, that can be quite blurred. There are people who are professional, quote unquote, professional photographers who may have a full-time job that's not photography, but they may still have a photography business and could be hired as a photographer in that way. They may sell prints, they may go on assignment and that sort of thing, even if it's not their main bread and butter. And then there might be people who are just as skilled as what you would consider a professional photographer, but they're hobbyists. They don't actually want to be pursuing it as a profession. This is their passion. And so in terms of whether you need to be specific in a certain genre of photography to be considered a professional, I don't think so, unless that's what you want to do. So if you want to be known as a wildlife photographer, and that's where that's the type of subject you're most passionate in photographing, then by all means put your energy into that. But if you're passionate about photographing all sorts of subjects, I see no reason to pigeonhole yourself into one specific genre. In fact, sometimes having different types of subjects makes you a more well-rounded photographer, and it can help you grow your photography in these different genres and how you approach composition and that sort of thing. So yeah, I don't know if that helps answer the question.
I think it does. And I love that. I love that was your response, because, I looked at her question too, and I completely back up what you have to say. It's like, photograph what you like. And that's what matters, and if you want to sell your images, there's other things you're going to have to do to get to that point. But I don't feel like you have to say, I can never, market myself as a wildlife photographer. And that it goes back to pigeonholing. People will do that for you. You don't need to do it for yourself. Karen Cooper, do you want to chime in?
Well, I agree with Brenda. I think the line of where we say, are you professional or not professional, is blurred. Some people say a professional is only someone who earns their complete living off of photography. Again, there are fabulous professional wildlife photographers who have full-time jobs doing something else. So I think we all have different definitions on what it is. And I back it up to do what you love. And we're all drawn to something. Just because I do landscapes doesn't mean I don't do macro. So I love all of it, but I'm not going to say I am a certain type of photographer because I don't do interior shots. I don't do people, but that doesn't mean I'm not a professional. So you go in the area that you love and that you're drawn to. And if you're true to yourself, you will see it in your work because your work will be a reflection of your soul and what you love.
I love you, ladies. Let me just say that. Okay, so we're going to now go to a little bit more about subject matter. And my friend Egidio is in this room, and his question is about landscapes. It's like, can you offer maybe one or two tips of how you can make a small nature scene appear grand? And I'm going to make you take that one, Karen, because you do it just about every other day when you post a photo. It's not always these big epic landscapes.
No. And it's not. And I think that's what people miss is that you see a scene that's 360 degrees around you. And how can you show it? Well, the answer is you can't. So what you need to do is put something in it that has perspective, that we can, as humans, relate to. So a tree, we can almost all of us can relate to what size a tree is. So now you put a tree in your foreground or midground, and then you let the mountain in the background give it scope, and that will give you grandeur. It's usually something that we can relate to in the foreground, and that'll give you the scene. Or it could be a panorama that is really big, and that will also give you a sense of size. But it's a judgment call on what the scene is. So when we say what is big, well, how do you photograph an old growth tree? Well, you pretty much can't unless you have a drone to go all the way up it. So you need to show a trunk of the old growth with something again in perspective. So that technique is used over and over and over and over again in any type of photography where you want to show something big. Like, for instance, Linda, when you showed your super cute little frog in Costa Rica, he was on a big leaf. So there you go. There's your perspective. You can always judge what size the leaf is, but now you're seeing a tiny little frog in it. So that gives people an idea of size.
Britta, do you want to chime in here?
Sure, I agree with all of that. I would just add, in terms of technique, one thing to consider would be using a wide angle lens with a small scene, which can give it, more depth, as Karen was saying. So typically, people think of small scenes or intimate landscapes as being photographed with a telephoto lens or, a more zoomed in lens where you're cutting out a lot of this scene. Consider using a wide angle to do the same kind of thing, and they'll get that deep depth of field and sort of that grand perspective of near far focusing and that sort of thing in the small scene. And the only other thing I would add is, to me, I defined a grand landscape as something that provides context. There's something that's recognizable there, whereas an intimate landscape or a small scene is more your interpretation of the scene. It's much smaller. You're excluding a lot in order to tell a more intimate story, a deeper story. So if you're trying to make a small scene look grand, then think about what sort of context you want to provide in that, and maybe that would make it feel more grand. And I think that's what Karen was talking about in terms of context and getting that size relation in there.
Okay. To jump to another topic, same subject composition, but Karen Riley has a question on composing abstracts. Do you have any tips for her? And then paired with another of her questions was, can you add to tips on composing, like repeating patterns? What can you do to make them interesting to look at? We see them, we get excited about them, but then you look through your viewfinder and you're like, I just don't know how to frame it. So any tips on working those two abstracts and then working, maybe it's a separate question, but repeating patterns?
Yeah, sure. I can take a stab at it. It's a great question. I struggle with this myself. I feel like you just got to keep practicing. It's going to take a long time. Just keep trying. And when it starts working, you'll know. And I know that's vague advice, but what I like to do is, in terms of looking for abstracts, it's kind of like blurring your vision a little bit. And then that may sound strange, but hear me out for a second. So trying to remove subject and think about colors, think about lines, think about shapes, textures. Where is the contrast? And, tonal contrast, color contrast, shape contrasts, what are those types of things, those elements? Just think of it as an elemental question, not what is my subject? Because usually it's this relationship between colors and lines and textures and shapes. And that is what's going to give you that abstract image. And then in terms of composition, and this goes for repeated patterns as well, not things like rule of thirds and that sort of things, but compositionally, what's going to help the viewer's eye sort of meander around the frame or guide the viewer from one side of the frame to the other. So you can be thinking about, a very simple example would be, are there any diagonal lines that you can be including that would go from, say, the lower left to the upper right of the frame? Something as simple as that is an easy way to start looking at, okay, this is a strong dynamic line. It's going to provide a lot of interest to the photograph. Can I incorporate something that has a line like that with the colors and textures and contrast that I have in order to create an abstract? So thinking that's just one example, but just thinking along those lines a little bit more abstractly, rather than like, this is a picture of a rock or sand or mud cracks or whatever. Think in terms of shapes and lines and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And that's, Michelle had the same kind of questions, like, how do you train your mind? How do you get that vision to see shapes and textures,
Yeah. I thought of this the other day when we have a pond here and I was walking around the pond with my daughter and the water was perfectly still. And so the trees above it were like a mirror onto the pond. And I didn't have my camera with me or anything, but it was really pretty. And it made me realize, you can play a trick with your eyes where you're looking at the reflection of the water or you're looking at the leaves below the surface of the water, right? So it's wherever you're putting your attention, you see a different thing of the same scene. And so you can play that game with yourself of, instead of saying, oh, I'm going to focus on the reflection and now I'm going to focus on the leaves under the surface of the water, think, well, I'm only going to focus on the colors. What am I seeing? I'm only going to focus on lines. Are the lines forming shapes? And in terms of seeing things like tonal contrast, for example, in a scene, there are different tricks that you can do. Like if it's something you're trying to practice doing, you could severely overexpose your image. You could really underexpose your image. You could switch your LCD display to only look in black and white. That's going to eliminate color. And so you're just focusing on the tonal differences in the scene. And those types of things will help you see, this part of the scene is really dark and this part of the scene is really light. If I recompose it, how is that going to change where your eye is going? Your eye is always going to go to the brightest part of the scene before the darker parts of the scene. So things like that can help you start to train your eye to see those nuances.
So Karen, a lot of times you're in dense forest, do you have some tips that you want to kind of add to what Brenda has said about looking for those repeating patterns, and how do you create abstracts? What are you looking for?
Well, what I do is I look for a pattern, and then I look for what's not in the pattern. So if there's a pattern that is, say, needles in a tree, and you're looking at that pattern over and over and over again, then you're going to come to a spot where there isn't any needles. That to me is what's interesting, is you're going to put the needles with the absence. And usually, as Brenda was saying, diagonal lines or some softer lines going through, and do it that way. So I look for an absence of the pattern and include that in the pattern.
Okay. So Brenda, I'm going to get you to pop open your stream shot. So
Yeah.
Barbara had sent me kind of, her question is, it was this photo was in your feed, and Barbara was curious. She wanted, okay, so back in April, mid-April, early April, Brenda was a speaker out of Chicago, which is a photography conference. And in this particular conference, she was, it was done via Zoom. And I believe this came from it wasn't the waterfalls, it was
No, the composition one.
Yeah. And so you posted this with some markup on it, and it kind of caught Barbara's eye. So she said, I'd be curious to see or listen to hear what Brenda was talking about in this photo.
Yes. So I'll end with what I had posted on Instagram
Sure.
as a teaser for the conference. But this is the photo itself. And I was using this image as an example of kind of what we were just talking about, of how to start reading the landscape and identifying things like lines and shapes and repeated patterns, and how you can then start to construct them together to make a more cohesive composition. So in this photograph, I would say that the most prominent leading line is the stream itself. So by using a slow shutter speed and making the creamy look of the water, we've got this very strong leading line curving, diagonally across the frame. And the way I've positioned myself is I now have that same sort of arced line repeated in the mossy area on the side of the stream there. And so, that's an area of color contrast and sort of making this repeated pattern that we don't consciously identify, but we perceive it subconsciously as creating cohesion in repetition and unity throughout the image. And then there's also a repeated shapes of the rocks that also form in continuity, a leading line to the other side of the frame, sort of the river sort of splits here. And so these rocks are bringing you to that other corner of the frame. And then lastly, the way the light is coming down from above creates this sort of triangular shape of just this area is brighter than the other areas. And triangles are also very strong shapes that our perception, our eyes are drawn to. And so when you're trying to figure out how to compose a scene, you want to think about, well, where do I want the viewer's attention to go to first? And then you can start to pick apart these elements in the scene and then compose so that they help the viewer go where you want them to go. So this was what I had posted on Instagram, was this graphic.
Yeah. And I was present for that presentation. It was good. Okay. Yeah. So Egidio has a question, and I want to know the answer too. Outside of the golden hour, what tips would you give to someone shooting landscapes in the middle of the day? You want to take it? Go ahead, Brenda.
Sure. Yeah. So I often am finding myself out photographing in the middle of the day, so I have no problem with that. And usually what I'm looking for is a couple of things. It depends on what the weather's doing. So if it's a cloudy day, then I'm looking for waterfalls and streams, because those are the best times to be, generally the best times to be photographing water is on a cloudy day. If it's a sunny day, then I'm looking for, either can I be creating shade somehow with a hat or a jacket or my body and doing more macro work? Or are there areas of the forest that I can be in where, there's enough of a canopy that the light is sort of diffused through the forest, but not too dappled and harsh? Or if it is a lot of contrasty, harsh overhead noontime light, then think about black and white photography. That is a really good time to be doing some high contrast work, is thinking about black and white. And even if you don't like doing black and white, I don't, black and white has grown on me over time. And I didn't start practicing black and white photography because I liked it. It was mostly because it was an exercise to help me see tonal differences and really kind of play around with textures and bringing out those contrasty areas of a scene. And the exercise just made me start to really love and appreciate black and white photography more. So I encourage you to just play around with it. And then the last tip I would give is exclude the sky if it's not interesting.
Oh, that's a big one. Karen, do you have any tips that you can offer about shooting in the middle of the day?
I would be shooting in a forest. If it was middle of the day, you go into the forest where there's a heavy overhead canopy and you get absolutely incredible light. Cloudy days will give you not so much drama in the forest. You want little bits of light coming through. So that's where I usually head in, and not in the ocean, not along the shore, because you're going to get way too much white in your skies and clouds. So it's always in a forest, or you just sit back and have a coffee and
wait it out.
and
wait it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Karen, Sue's question is, your images captured in the forest are so intense. She can feel the mist and smell the moss. And I've been there. She says she's been there, she's seen it, but she couldn't capture it in a photo. And she wants to know, is it possible to learn how to compose and photograph a landscape?
In the forest?
Well, yours are. I mean, I don't necessarily think she's talking about, well, she's saying she's been to a forest and she's had a difficult time pulling a landscape out of it. And that's something that that's your bread and butter. You live in, I mean, every other time I get a text message from you is like, I'm on my way to the forest. So what are you doing? And is there something that you could kind of help her figure out? Is that something she can learn? Is that just practice? Is there
just practice? And I think it's going back how I teach people that ask me, how do I do certain things? I just say, keep doing the same thing over and over and over, but go in different lighting conditions, different times of the day, different seasons, but do the same thing. And when you do that, you will start to see the essence of what you want to show in the lighting conditions and your mood as well. I mean, sometimes you're just not in the mood to go, don't do it. Or put the camera down and sit and enjoy it.
And I think too, Karen, that's your backyard. That's your playground. That's where you go. You don't just go once every 6 months on a vacation. That is where you play. Whereas, Sue lives here in Texas and we don't have access to those forests. So and I can relate to what she's saying because, I went to the Olympic National Park last summer and it was my first time to be there and I was overwhelmed and I didn't know where to start. And so I think a little bit of it is, Sue, it's not you, it's we just don't have access, and that repetition of that, I don't know, familiarity or comfort, or you just know what you're going to grab. And
do you have that one photo I sent you with the tree?
I've got a lot of pictures that you sent me.
No.
Which, yes. Okay.
So that might,
that
might be a good example for her to see. Yeah. So here's, again, it's not a grand landscape, but if you know the area, this is an absolutely massive forest. you can't show it as that. So you take the bits and pieces out of it, and lighting and texture. So if you can get that plus an element of the branch coming around with the moss in it, adds interest. So that is what I consider a landscape. But some people don't see that as a landscape. They want, mountains in the background and things in the foreground. But this is my landscape. This is my backyard. So this is, again, just waiting for the light and not showing the whole thing, showing only a part of it, but in a scale that you can wrap your mind around how big these trees are.
All right.
I'll add a little something that I like to do, especially if going to visit new locations is a challenge. So say you don't live in a really beautiful, picturesque area, and you have a few trips planned and you come back with images that you're not so crazy about. One exercise that you can do is to just play with the cropping tool in Lightroom. So, practice looking for compositions within the composition. Because oftentimes what leads to a stronger composition is to, only be including in the frame what's necessary to relay what it is you're trying to communicate through your photograph. And so often we're including too much. And so a good way to practice, if you don't have the ability to go out and be creating new photographs all the time, go through the library of photographs that you have and just start cropping and playing around with, would this other, frame within the frame make a better composition? And then as you start to incorporate that when you're out in the field, you'll be able to start seeing that a little bit more readily.
This question's for you, Brenda. She read your post on slow photography, and she wants to know, how does one slow down in a local or much visited scene when you're often surrounded by a lot of people and it's busy? And how do you photograph that with intent? How do you, I'm thinking, I'm kind of adding my own things, like, how do you push those other people out of the way so that you can really wrap your head around a scene?
That is a big challenge. And if I'm completely honest, I just avoid it altogether. I really don't like photographing around other people. So for me to feel like I can really connect with the landscape, I really need to be kind of in my own place, my own world. So that is really difficult. I wish I had better advice for that. I don't find that I'm very good at going into crowded spaces and being able to really feel like I'm connecting with the landscape.
Yeah. Karen, do you run across that kind of, do you have a thought process of, maybe it's you're always in forest. And I know that sometimes you've got the whole area to yourself, but is there any tips that you could offer her to kind of block out the noise and be able to concentrate on how she can grab her?
Well, I'm with Brenda. I avoid it.
Yeah.
If there's a shot where there's 500 people in it, it's not anything I want to do.
Yeah.
And unless I can go at a time at 2:00 in the morning and get the Milky Way and there's nobody around, and now you've got something that I think is unique. But I'm with Brenda. I avoid it. I don't feel comfortable around a lot of other people because I can't think. I can't. I don't go through the thought process that I do when I'm all by myself.
And I think both of you that's what photography brings to you. It's that solitude. It's that focus.
Exactly.
Where you're in your own world.
It's really hard to get into that creative flow when other people are distracting you.
That's why it's really difficult to do, for me, to do workshops. I just can't be around a whole lot of people and still think, if you're teaching someone, to teach the skills and then do a photo as well. I can't get that balance. So I just don't do it.
Okay. Karen, this is another question for you, and it's from Sue. Apparently, Sue spent some time on your websites, ladies. I love it. She said she read, she respects, and agrees with your theory on editing images.
Yeah.
You've inspired her to capture landscapes and study them a little bit more, and perhaps add minor tweaks to represent what she saw, what she heard, what she smelled, what she felt. Can you share a tip to get her started?
Yeah. Be true to the scene. You don't need to fake a scene. You need to spend your time in the field to watch it and to understand it. Understand what the light does, what the water's doing, what the clouds are doing. That approach to respecting nature will give you a fabulous shot every time. But if you run in and think, okay, the light's not great, but I'm going to take this shot and I'm going to come back and I'm going to Photoshop the heck out of it, you end up with a piece of artwork, but I don't think you're being true to what you saw. And I think that reverence will teach you more about yourself as well as photography. In the end, it's not about the photo. It's about what are you learning about yourself and what are you learning about how you connect with nature. If you come away from a scene, maybe not with a photo, but understanding yourself, you're a winner, far, far above anybody else that has to Photoshop it.
And I think both of you, Brenda, I'm going to speak for both of you, but you guys don't tinker a whole lot with your images. It's either you get it right in camera or you photograph what you see, and it's very true. And it's there are so many people that play around with editing, and I'm not dissing them. It's just I can look at your photographs and say, if I go to Vermont, this is what I'm really going to see, and I'm not going to be surprised. And I'm like, wait a minute, where did she photograph the stuff? And I think that is one of the reasons that we are friends, is that your photography is real, and it makes me want to go there and see these places for myself, because it's, I don't want to say that's is accurate, but it is, what's the word I'm looking for? Original.
It's real.
It's real. And there's authentic. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Mika's got a question for both of you. What sort of research do you do before going on a shoot in a new location far from home? And anybody want to take that one?
I'll take that one.
Yeah.
I do a lot of research on natural history. I look back on how the area was formed through ice ages, which is important for knowing if an area was bypassed in the ice age, so that you know what the topography is going to be like, and the fauna as well. It can be different in different areas. And also I look at weather patterns to know what the weather is going to be like. So there's times of the year where it's not worth going into certain areas if you're going just from a photography aspect, because either the light is too harsh, or there's storms, which is something we have to be careful of, or it's wildfire season, or a whole number of reasons that, or it's hunting season, which is another reason I don't go up into some areas because it's dangerous. So that's kind of what I look through, and I also find areas that I just think I'm going to love, and I'll go anyway. So that's how I do it.
Brenda?
Very similar approach. Sometimes I'll read up on some, like if there's a photography guidebook of a location. For example, in the fall, I went to Acadia National Park for the first time. And I had Colleen Minnick's book, which was her handbook to Acadia, which was amazing, super helpful of, not just example photographs and locations, but also, information about, well, this is better in the fall and this is better in the summer, this is better in the winter, just because of how the light is going to be in a certain spot and stuff like that. So that kind of information is really helpful. I also will use Google Earth to scope out some spots. But primarily I like to wander and explore. I like to go in without a lot of preconceived ideas of what I'm going to find. So usually I'll identify a few hikes that I would like to do that I think would be good to explore, and then I kind of go from there. Once I'm at a place and you start to get the lay of the land, it's easier to, revise as you go than to go in with, a checklist of places, I think, anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, this is the next topic I'm going to kind of throw at you is social media, because I know how much you both love it so much. so much. But that's how we all kind of met. So let's just start with Kathy's question. Brenda, what social media venues would you think the best for photography is?
I think Instagram.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Karen?
Yeah, Instagram. Twitter, it's different. It's not as openly sharing images. It's a little bit more work to do Twitter than it is for Instagram. Facebook doesn't seem to be doing anything. And I don't see any other venues out there that are as interactive and as dynamic to be able to talk to the person that's posted right away. I mean, I think it's for what people use it for. I think it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I was in a discussion with somebody that has a pretty large following on Instagram, and he was getting disgusted with Instagram, and he was going to Twitter and taking all his toys over there, and he's having great success, but he also has a huge following. And I think that, it's harder if you are just now getting on Twitter, you're just not going to get a lot of momentum. Whereas Instagram, I still think, even though people gripe about the algorithms and hashtags don't really work, I really think that it's still the best platform available to photographers for.
Well, some of the best photographers on Instagram don't have that many followers.
Right. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So if it's about followers, then, I guess that's still where you go. But I mean, just to be able to see a whole variety of, and if you don't look at how many followers there are, if that's not something that is important to you, there's some amazing people on there that are doing really, really incredible work that might have, 200 followers or something. So I don't look at followers. I don't think it's that important. I mean, I know you can buy them. So then numbers don't really mean anything when you find out the other end is that, you can buy them. So.
Yeah. I mean, I use it for, I use the hashtag to find my content,
Exactly.
If I want to learn about, Yosemite, I will look at that hashtag and see what people have, are photographing in the places that I don't want to go, because everybody's got the same photo.
And that also leads into local knowledge too. So if you find someone that's somewhere and they've been photographing like Brenda, then you'll, message Brenda and say, well, I see you're from here and you've got these great images. Is there any tips you can share with me on where to go? And then Brenda's never going to tell you where the secret spots are, but
but she might warn you. She might warn you, hey, if you see this tree, go left, because you might slide down a hill. So she might warn you on the track. Speaking from her personal experience, but yeah, it's very rare you're going to get your secret spots from people. But I look at it as, opportunities to be inspired and to kind of like, okay, get my camera, let's go somewhere. Michelle was curious, how much time do you guys spend on social media each day?
As little as possible.
I think it varies if you're bored for an hour and I don't mean that in a bad way.
No.
And you just want to do the the 4-inch scroll kind of thing. I'm about an hour. Yeah.
All right. Egidio is curious, how do you reconcile making photos in a sensitive area and posting them on social media? Even if you geotag the general area or no tag at all, some people may still find the exact location by hashtags. He's particularly referencing inside national parks and public places. Brenda, I'm going to get you to answer that because that is a question I've heard you ask several people on your podcast. So, and I like your answer, so I want other people to hear it.
Well, I think generally if it's a sensitive area, and it's something that you would like to, protect, then don't post it. Keep it to yourself. And that's sometimes that's hard to do. But maybe there's something else from that experience that you could post that wouldn't necessarily bring attention to a sensitive area. Another thing would be, maybe not include hashtags that would draw attention to it. Something that Karen does that I like a lot is she'll just say, location will be planet Earth or something like that, very general. And I see more people doing that now, which I think is good. And then if people are asking you about locations that are sensitive, then I think it comes down to a judgment call of, do you think that person is going to revere it, to use Karen's word, in the same way that you would? And are they going to then share it, right? So you have to think about the trickle effect that can happen with sharing sensitive locations like that. Because many people have talked about how they have, the special little spot that they shared with one person, and then they went back a year later and it's completely trampled. And, there are even locations here in Vermont, which, we definitely have. Tourism is a big part of our economy with the, the colored leaves in the fall and all of that. But there are locations that I won't go back to that I used to be able to photograph because there are now boardwalks leading to them because so many troves of people have gone to see these waterfalls and things like that. So, and that's just, over the course of 5 years, I've seen that change. And so it does have an impact. And so it is something to be wary of.
And I agree. I don't tell people either. If it's an area where right now there's some painted turtle rehabilitation going on in some areas, and I just I'll never post it, and I'll never say anything about it. I think it's important not to, because a photo isn't going to change the fact that somebody stomped all over a nesting ground of painted turtles. Like what's the point? So it's just better not to say anything or not to post it.
Yeah, I agree with you. All right, let's jump into some technical questions. And these will be pretty easy. Ashley's curious, what kind of digital editing software technology, what do you use and why do you use it? Karen, you want to go?
I use Photoshop and Lightroom. Why do I use it? Because RAW has to be converted to a format that can be printed, and Photoshop does some things that Lightroom can't. So I use it both, but sparingly, whatever least amount you can get away with, which is also means the least amount I have to sit in front of a computer.
Brenda, what about you?
Same. Yep. So I bring the images into Lightroom. I usually do a few little quick edits in there, adjusting color balance and a little bit of exposure. And then if I bring it into Photoshop, it's usually because I want to do some more dodging and birding, or I want to clone out some debris in the scene or something, like a annoying stick or something like that. And Photoshop is just better at that function. And then I'll also use some luminosity masks. And lastly, if I'm doing like a focus stack, that's focus stacking, or panoramic stitched panoramas are the only sort of multi-exposure photo that I'll create. I don't do composites or anything like that, but I'll do those things in Photoshop.
Okay. You brought it up. Let's just jump into Brenda. This is an image that you have called Peeking Around the Peak. And the question is, is it a stitched panorama? And if not, can you maybe share some typical camera settings and lenses that you use? Do you want to share that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
she's
I
calling
am
it your grand land, and under your grand landscapes on your website. The photo is called Peeking Around the Peak.
Can you see it all right?
Perfect.
Okay. So this is the image peeking around the peak. So this is a single photograph. It's not a stitched panorama. And so I've included the technical information here on the left. So this was shot with a full frame camera, D810 with a 24-70 at 70 millimeters. It was 1/60th of a second f/18 to help me get the star effect of the sun. What also helped get that star effect was how I positioned myself so that the light was literally peeking around the peak, and that helps bend the light so that it emphasizes the starburst effect of the sun. And then the ISO was 125. And so this isn't, I wouldn't call these like typical settings that I use. It just was the appropriate setting for this type of backlit image. I don't do a lot of stitched panoramas, but this next photo is an example of one. So again, same camera setup. This was done on a tripod at 60 millimeters, 1/80th of a second, f/13, ISO 320. And these were 5 separate images shot in landscape format that I then merged into a panoramic in Lightroom, cleaned it up in Photoshop, and then brought it back into Lightroom and cropped it to a 3:1 aspect ratio to get it that more elongated panoramic view.
Great.
And that was it. I know Karen has other ones to share.
Yeah. So let me get you to, because she's on the.
Yeah. So you can force me to stop sharing, right?
I can. The power I have. We are professionals. All right. The same question applies to you, Karen. She's curious if your landscapes are stitched. And let me see if I can. Let me share my screen and I'll throw.
So I have a variety. It depends on how big the scene is, whether I do single and crop it or multiple images.
Let's start with this one.
Yeah. So this is a single image on a tripod, 1/10 of a second, with a polarizer,
Right.
and that's cropped. So that's an example of one image.
Yeah. Okay. One pretty image.
Yeah, it's not bad. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your non-mediocre work with us here.
Yeah. No problem. This is multiple images stitched together. I think it's either 2 or 3 on a tripod. The go-to lens I use all the time is a 24-70. And it depends on what millimeter I set it on for the scene. So this is not a wide angle. So many people think because the foreground is bent, that this is a wide angle. It's actually how the land eroded here into the ocean. So this is an example of 3.
They get bigger.
Yeah.
I just love this one.
Yeah, this is a place called Carmana Valley on Vancouver Island. So it's an unlogged natural forest that's down to the ocean, which is a very unusual ecological reserve on Vancouver Island. So this is on what's called a pano arm. And I won't go into the technical aspects of what a pano arm is. You can look it up. I think mine is a really right stuff pano arm. So this is 2 rows of 3 vertical images stitched together. Now the files are massive, but the image was massive as well. So I think this one ended up being printed at 8 by 16 feet. And it went into a private home. So these are, pano arms are super interesting because it gets the foreground. If you look at the ferns in the foreground, they're absolutely pin sharp, right up to the to the trees in the background are pin sharp, and you can see it when it's blown up big. And that's why you need the panorama, to be able to get the ferns in the foreground and the background in focus. Plus, the scene is so big that you need 2 rows of vertical images stitched together.
Can't imagine how much space that took on your hard drive.
Yeah, it was a lot big. It was, but it took a long time to stitch it too. But the stitching's incredible.
Okay, let's show of hands. Who wants to go here with me? Gosh, this is gorgeous.
So this is the Tatshenshini Alsek World Heritage Site in northwestern British Columbia. This is sunrise along the Tatshenshini. So if you look at where that on the bottom left, where that band of cloud is, that's actually the Tatshenshini River. It's a world-class rafting river, as well as the landscape's just incredible. So this is, I think this is 5 vertical images stitched together on a tripod. And again, 24-70, my go-to lens, pin sharp, works great. And I focused not on the mountains in the background, but I focused along the ridgeline. And that's far enough away to get the foreground and the mountains in focus. So it's not always focused dead center in the image. Sometimes it's focused closer in, so that you get your depth of field in the whole image. And then stitched together in, I like to use Lightroom to stitch it together. I just find Photoshop's a little bit buggy sometimes. So, and also on these ones, it depends on how fast the clouds are. So you have to be pretty fast when you're doing your images. They have to be done once you have your tripod set up and you've done it. You know, I do this all the time, so I'm really fast at it. You can get probably 4 shots done in under 4 seconds.
Okay. I think that was I think that was all the photos that you had. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to sneak in a plug for session 99. My friend Lawrence Lederman was here, and he was talking about overlanding photography, and he snuck in a bonus section in his presentation, and it was the technical parts and his tips on how to create stitch panoramas. So if you're wondering how to do that, you might want to look for that episode, because he spent a lot of time showing us how to the mechanics of it. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I love them. I'm too lazy to do them well. All right. Thank you for sharing those, Karen, because gosh, they're beautiful. They're just beautiful.
You have to come up. You have to come up.
I know. It's on my list. So I think that, Karen, you shared your favorite lens was 24-70. Is that what's usually?
Yeah. Your 24-70 is very versatile. You can do close-ups and the long shots with it. For weight, it's a nice light lens. It's not the 14-24, which is the gargantuan 8 pounds and something on the body. So that's the one I use the most.
Okay. Brenda, do you have an all-around travel and landscape lens that you use?
Same, 24-70, especially around here. So I was interested to hear, Karen, that you also are interested in the 24-70, but I guess when you're doing a lot of forest scenes, that makes sense. But I found that when I spend time in the Yukon, I wanted wider than 24. Because the landscapes are so grand. Whereas around here, anything wider than 24 is, unless you're trying to, do a really close foreground, a flower with something in the background, and really trying to exaggerate it. The wide angle in the Northeast anyways, you don't get much from that.
Right. You need the wide angle for Northern Lights and, anything you want to do that's got the massive, huge sky in it. You need something a little bit bigger.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
I didn't want to focus too much on gear, but Ashley had a really good question, and I wanted to ask you, or her question is, has there been any one piece of advice or type of equipment that has truly been a game changer for you and your photography? What's in your bag, Brenda Petrella?
We can talk about that. Yeah, happy to talk about that. Let's see. I would say an L bracket.
Yep.
Love my L bracket. It, for people who don't know, it mounts on like an L on the side of your camera. So you can be putting your camera in vertical or horizontal mode very easily without having to reposition your legs, your tripod legs. So yeah, that never leaves my camera. Piece of advice, photograph what you love, be true to you.
Yeah. Karen Cooper?
Yeah, I use the L bracket all the time too, but I, not constantly, but I do like my panel arm. I think for the big scenes, it's really been, especially when I print something that's massive, I need it for the size and the megapixel on the images. When they print, you need as much as you can get. So the overlap when you're stitching 6, I think I've done an image with 12 overlap. So that's the best thing. If you're doing that, if you're not, it's a bit expensive to get into it. It's, I forget how much, but I think it was $1,000 for the tripod and the panel arm itself, and a bit of a learning curve. But if you're going to go big and do any of these big scenes and you need to print big, that it's worth every cent that you spend on it.
Yeah. If you guys haven't visited Karen's Instagram page specifically, because she often is doing these little my stories of her gallery, and she'll pan across with her phone her image that is on a wall, and it is so huge. It's just massive and impactful. So I think that you get every ounce of the price you put into that panel arm, and I can see why that is a big tool that you can't live without. So
yeah, and it's a tool,
really good argument.
and it adds to your arsenal of what you're able to produce to show a potential customer what size you can do. So for me, it's worth it. And if you're not printing that big, I wouldn't suggest you go out and spend gazooks amounts of money to buy something like this, unless you want to.
Yeah. Okay, so let's hit on some advice, because Egidio has a question, and it goes a little bit to lenses. We talked about your favorite lens, but Egidio is a person that does a lot of traveling, and he likes landscapes. And his question is, when you go on a photo shoot, do you plan in advance which lenses you bring with you, or do you just pack a couple of them just in case? It comes down to weight and how much are you lugging around?
Yeah, so I have sort of my go-to set that I like to bring. And again, it comes down to what are you going to be photographing? So for instance, if I'm not going to be doing any night sky, if I'm pretty sure that I'm not going to do any night sky photography, then there's no reason to have to bring the wide angle fast lens that is super heavy. So like a 14 to 24 f2.8 lens, if you're not going to be using that for night sky, or if it's not your go-to landscape lens, then leave it at home because it's so big and bulky. If you're going to be going to a lot of gardens, and then you might want to be bringing a macro lens or a telephoto, or things like that you may or may not need for landscapes. But for my personal approach to it, so what I have found works really well, night sky stuff excluded, I'll bring a 24 to 70, a 70 to 200, and a 2x teleconverter. And then on my camera, I have the Nikon Z7 and the Z6 II. And on both of those cameras, and I'm sure you can do this on Canon and Sony, but you can set that, yes, I want to shoot as a full frame camera, or I want to shoot as a crop sensor camera, or at a different aspect ratio. And so what that effectively does, you are cutting out pixels, but the Z7 is a full frame camera. So if I'm doing, a 200 millimeter shot, it's 200 millimeters. If I set it to a crop sensor, then it's it's 1.5 times 200. So that's 350 or whatever it is millimeters. And then if I put the 2x teleconverter on there, now I'm, even further, I'm at almost to 800 millimeters. So it really sort of gives you a huge breadth of reach. It might not be a huge high quality because you will be cutting out some of your pixels from a full frame image to a crop image, but it gives you that reach without having to bring yet another gigantic telephoto lens. So I find that to be a versatile setup.
Karen?
Yeah, I use the 24 to 70 almost all the time. I'll take a 14 to 24 if I think there's going to be some scene, but half the time I never use it. And then I've got a 400 mil telephoto, which is a gargantuan heavy thing as well. The size of that thing is just enormous. So I try to pare that down to 2, but I don't always. So usually it's 3, and then a tripod as well. So it is heavy, but I don't want to miss a scene. And another thing, if you're able to do, is to scout the scene first. So, or look at, if you're going somewhere that you already know that's going to be an incredible landscape, then don't take your macro lens, or don't take your other things. And if you go and you say, oh shoot, I wish I had my macro lens, and if you can, go back with it so that you're not carrying it. Because a pack, I don't know, Brenda, if you've ever actually weighed one of your packs, but it can be up to 40-45 pounds, and that's before lunch. So I don't know if you want to be carrying that around all the time. You can, but it really is hard on your back after a while.
I'm glad that was asked to you and not to me, because I completely disagree with you guys. I take everything and I make my Aaron carry it. Okay, so this is a really, really good question, Mika. Ladies, what precautions do you take as nature photographers in secluded areas, especially as a woman, but also in general being in the wild? What do you pack other than your photography equipment? Are you bear spray carriers, or are you packing knives, or just anything that you can offer some tips on that?
Well, one of the things I carry is a device called a Zoleo, and it's a satellite navigation, communication, SOS. So when I'm at a cell phone range, if I'm up in the boonies somewhere and God forbid something happens, which it never has, it has a SOS signal that will locate you within, I think, 2 feet.
Oh,
so
cool.
I always carry that. It's very affordable. And I don't carry bear spray because of what bear spray is. And bear spray only shoots, I think, 20 feet or 30 feet. I don't want to be that close. So I carry bear bangers, and they're a blank shell that you put into a pen device, and then you just bang the back of the pen and it'll shoot the shell off. And as long as you aim it in front of the bear and not behind the bear, so you steer the bear towards you, bang it in front of the bear, and they don't like that sound, and they'll take off. And of course, always a first aid kit, and lots of water.
Can you say the name of the SOS device one more time?
It's called Zoleo, Zoleo.
Okay. Brenda?
Yeah. So in addition, I also carry a satellite communication device. Mine is a Garmin InReach, and first aid kit, a couple of hand warmers. I always have a little cinch sack. Basically, it's a compression sack full of spare socks, gloves, hat, down jacket. If it's the summertime, also, in addition to that, I will always still bring a down jacket, some rain gear, rain pants. And that, compresses down, especially because of the down is very compressible. And so it doesn't take up a lot of room in the pack. But in case around here anyway, I know it's probably different in Texas, but around here, even in the summertime, if you're stuck out overnight because you are unable to get off the trail for some reason, you could get cold. It's, not uncommon for it to be, 30s and 40s at night in the summertime. And especially if there's a dew, stuff like that. Also bring like one of those, emergency blankets that's like a foil blanket. It's very lightweight and compact. Again, can just trap your body heat. Sometimes I'll bring a pocket knife, although I've never really used it for anything like that. Headlamp is also key, something I always have in my pack. Another piece of advice is to let people know where you're going before you hit the trail or get on the road, and sort of what your expected return time should be. And lastly, I'll get a little plug for the podcast. I did an episode addressing all of this. It was episode 48, I believe, about hiking safely alone.
Yeah.
So
yes, that was actually a very, very good episode. Can I switch gears on you just a little bit? I'm sorry to jump, but there were a lot of questions and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've had y'all held y'all captive for a while, but I don't want to let you go. Let's talk about conservation. Mika is a macro photographer, and her question is, what are some good ways we can use our nature photos to promote conservation of our environment? She takes a lot of photos of insects, and she'd love nothing more than to make a difference in the delicate balance of nature. Any suggestions?
Yeah, she needs to contact some conservation groups. A lot of them do research on different flora and fauna in their area, and they don't have enough hands to photograph what's in the area. So if she can get in touch with some of those, they'd probably welcome her with open arms if she's got shots of things that they're not able to get. Most of them don't do it as a professional. They do it as a documentation. So if they had those, and a lot of conservation groups do fundraisers, calendars, books, print sales, all that kind of fundraising. So I think that that would be my advice, is contact conservation, and not just the small ones. There's big ones too that are happy for photographers to join.
Brenda, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, same. Yeah. Reach out, see what sort of projects are going on in your area. There was also if you're interested in how to get started in conservation photography in your area. I don't have the episode in front of me right now, but in December, I I shared an episode from another podcast called the Impact Photography Podcast, which is a conservation podcast. And Jamie Heimbuch, who's the host there, gives tips on how to get started in conservation photography. So you can check that out, or just check out her podcast. It's great.
It is really great. And I'm glad that you, I was prepared to go. I know I can give you the name. She's absolutely wonderful. So what kinds of things do you think are important to keep in mind so that we make the least amount of impact on the environment as we photograph?
I would say, first, stick with the leave no trace principles. So things like being careful about where you're building fires. Is that safe to do? What sort of, pack it in, pack it out, hike on durable surfaces, don't go around fences, pay attention to signs, things like that, pick up trash. And I think it also goes back to what we were talking about earlier about sharing locations too, and sensitive areas, and helping educate people on those things and speaking up. So like if you're in a national forest and somebody's flying a drone and they're not permitted there, conflict is not always an easy thing, but sometimes it's good to be able to say, hey, did you know that this isn't allowed here? Because that is disturbing the wildlife and stuff like that. So
Karen?
And my suggestion is be careful where you're putting your feet.
Yeah.
Stay on the trails. We have an area up close to where I live that has a huge amount of ponds. and the tree frogs lay their eggs there, and they hatch out, and a certain time of year they migrate into the forest, and it happens to be right across the path. So when you know what time that is, they don't shut the trails down, which is something that we're trying to get them to do. But people don't see. And because they blend in, they look exactly like the trail. So you have to be careful where you're putting your feet and be aware of what is in your area and what's going on in your area.
Thank you, guys. One last question for Brenda, two for you, Karen, but same question for both of you. Brenda, Karen, what has been the biggest challenge you face as a photographer?
Time. I just don't have enough time to do everything I want to do.
Brenda?
Yes, same. Actually doing photography.
I know, we were kind of laughing because Brenda was like, I can't remember the last time I really got to pull out my camera and
Yeah.
spend some time with it. Because, you spend a lot of time with your podcast and, writing and Karen, same thing. There's just not enough hours in the day.
Yeah,
so-
exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
We need to ourselves 3 times or something, and then that would be better.
I don't think 3 is enough. Okay, one last question, and I promised I would ask. Karen, and Brenda was part of this too, but the question is for you, Karen. This comes from our dear friend, Vince Maidens, who, by the way, did an episode of Happiness Hour a couple of months ago on photographing owls. But Vince is also a fellow Canadian, but he's living he's living in the United Kingdom now. But he wants to know, this goes to Prince for Peace. He wants to know, how did you come up with the idea to gather wildlife photographers? He just thinks it's all about wildlife photographers. It's not, Vince, but how did you come up with the idea to gather photographers from all over the world to help support the Ukrainian effort? And he wanted to, I'm supposed to say, he is truly, truly thankful for the effort that you put into this project, and you got it all sorted and you got people engaged, and he thinks you're amazing. But he is curious about how you came up with that idea, and how'd you get it off the ground, and maybe it will help somebody else, because there's always going to be
Right. Yeah.
somebody that needs your help. So yeah.
This can actually go back to the conservation question of how do you do something. I had a conversation with Joel Robison, who is a photographer as well. And when the war first broke out, he's, again, like everybody else, feeling completely overwhelmed. And I said, well, we need to do something. And what can you do? Well, I don't have millions of dollars to donate, but I am a photographer. I can do something. So we said, why don't we do a print sale? And then Linda Nickell said, I'll help with that. And it rolled from there. And so trying to get people from all different genres in so that we had a nice variety to offer people for sale, landscapes, macro. People, once they heard about it, oh my gosh, I mean, it almost makes me all teary that people were so generous and offered their files up for print. And I just ran with it, and I figured, how am I going to do it? And I just figured it out on the fly, made a couple of mistakes, but if your heart's into it, you'll figure it out how to do it. You just ask people, how do you do this?
Yeah. And, really it comes down to when people have ideas and it comes from a pure place of genuinely helping others, people step up. All you have to do is ask them. And I mean, you and I were talking about it almost daily, and it was just, have you asked this person? Well, I don't know that person. Well, ask. And then the next thing you know, it's like, oh my God, we're getting to add these people to this fundraiser. So it touched quite a few people in a lot of different locations, and it was a great project. And unfortunately, it had to be done. But people.
And I like how I like to look at it is these were 15 or 17 amazing people that came together that just happened to have photography in common.
Yeah.
It wasn't the photography, it was the people. They're just absolutely incredible. And the friends that we've made out of it is, these people will be friends for the rest of your life because they have that humanity and depth to them that is important as a human.
Yeah. So, ladies, this was fantastic. I know you guys have used all your words for the rest of the night. There's so much information that came out of both of you, and it takes time to sit through these. And I'm like, there were questions I missed. We've run out of time, but I wanted to thank both of you for, Brenda's on the East Coast. It's way past her bedtime. Apparently, she goes to bed at 8. But I just really appreciate it. And I really have enjoyed our friendships and, whacking at ideas and trying to figure out, how can we get better and how can we help other people with the questions they have, the challenges they have, the curiosities, because, not a lot of people would take the time to answer all of these questions in one swoop. And I truly, truly appreciate it. I'm going to close out the session. Is there anything you want to say, Brenda?
Well, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. It's been great to be back on the Happiness Hour and chat with you guys. And I wouldn't mind a round 2 Q&A. It was really, and I know there were a lot of questions in the chat that we didn't get to. And if people have follow-up questions to tonight, feel free to reach out if we didn't get to them. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I would love to do it again sometime. So thank you for providing this platform for people.
Yeah. I recorded, she would be happy to do this again. So you have learned nothing, Brenda, about me. Nothing. Here, you were like, I don't know, yes, you want to do this. And I'm so glad that you did. And I think the contribution that you made here, you come from a different, you guys were fundamentally the same. We all respect nature. We all love being in it. You guys more so than me sometimes, but we all have this in common. And when you look at each other's work, it's just like, wow. There's a lot of admiration that I have of both of your works. And I so appreciate you doing this, Karen. Any last words of wisdom that you would like to impart on us?
I just want people to be better human beings. And if we have to do it through photography and learn decency and respect for each other, then that's how we do it. The platform's photography, but the human beings are still who we are. And that's how we need to move forward as a race.
Brenda, write a book so that she can do the foreword for you, please.
Yes, exactly.
She's so elegant and graceful. And every time I talk to her, it's just like, wow, why didn't I come up with that? Lady, thank you so much. This is wonderful.
Thank you, Linda.
You guys can connect with Karen through her website, KarenCooperGallery.com, and on Instagram at Karen Cooper Photo. And Brenda's website is at outdoorphotographyschool.com. And her Instagram is Brenda Petrella. And I will link all of that in the show notes so that you can just hit a click. Please look for her outdoor photography podcast on your favorite podcast player. Next week, Elise Bender and Bree Stockwell will be here to talk about putting nature first. As ambassadors for the Texas region, they will introduce us to the Nature First principles and how they apply to both landscape and wildlife photography. Until next time, go out and create something beautiful, and I hope that we see you again soon.